welcome to Mr. Turner and Mrs. McClellan's podcast. Today we're going to talk about the Holocaust. Just wanted to say, hey, make sure you guys are all doing all right. Before we get started, a couple things. Ms. McClellan, I'm trying this thing, and nobody thinks. I went and I asked people about it, and I'm dropping this on her. She doesn't know that this is coming. There you go. But I wanted to do this thing where it was messy or quarantine hair, don't care. And I got like 5 pictures. Nobody's sending me pictures. So I'm hoping that they send me pictures for quarantine hair, don't care. But they're really good ones. So I don't know. I need them by Wednesday. I got like 10 amazing ones. But will you send me a picture of quarantine hair, don't care?
Sure, I'll do that. That sounds fun.
All right. The assignment before we get started is going to be pretty easy today, guys. Watch the video, which you're doing right now. You're going to write 7 things that you learned from Miss McClellan or I on this video today, and then you're going to turn them in. Now, one of you is going to say, well, I turned that into Mr. Turner. That's not how it works. You have to turn them in to both of us. One to me, one to Miss McClellan. They can be the same thing, but we need 2.
You can send me what you send him.
Yeah, like 2. 1 + 1 = 2. Don't tell Miss McClellan that you turned it into me, and then whatever, you get a point. All right, my due date's is Monday, March 11th. I'm assuming Miss McClellan, yours is the same.
Mine will be the same date. You get a week to do it.
All right, so this is for Miss McClellan, not for you guys. We're going to go on to slide 2. She has it in front of her, but because we're not technology people, we don't know how to work things. All right, question 1. We're just the best way to teach the Holocaust. The Holocaust, I don't know about you, Miss McClellan. For me, it's just really, really difficult to teach. It's emotionally hard, and I'm not an emotional person, and I'm always afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing.
So, when I teach the Holocaust, it's about teaching genocide. And when you teach genocide, you're teaching about a hate, about a true evil in the world that occurs that we don't think is occurring or occurs around us. And it's hard to understand why. So when you teach a subject like the Holocaust, World War II, it is innately emotional. It has to be, because it's teaching humanity. So I love teaching it. I am emotional. Go ahead, Mr. Turner.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to hog our podcast here. I just think it's important for people to know that it's not an easy subject to teach about or talk about, especially on camera where people, like, I'm afraid that I'll say something wrong and everybody will be like, he was wrong. And then I'll become viral.
Well, you got a good look for viral.
Okay. I can't look down. That's weird. All right. The first question actually came to us from Emily Marshall, and she sent it to me a long time ago. She sent it to me when we first started this, and it gets asked every year. And a lot of these questions were asked by multiple people in different ways, so we didn't mean to leave anybody out when we did this. But so your questions could have been the same, just for the record. And she said, why did Hitler hate the Jewish people? And the answer isn't, in history, the answer isn't always a big answer. Sometimes it's a lot of little answers. And in this case, it's a lot of little answers. We talked about the end of World War I. Number 1, nobody knows why World War I ended. And for some reason, the Jewish people were blamed for the end of World War I. We talked a little bit, at least in my video, about the Weimar Republic and how they were broke and how people had to take wheelbarrows full of cash to buy loaves of bread. And Jewish people, especially at the time, tended to be bankers, and they blamed a lot of the problems on the bankers. The third reason, and maybe the one that's the most overarching, was there's a lot of anti-Semitism, which means anti-Judaism, going on during the time, and it could just be that at some level Hitler was a politician and he was just capitalizing on that. Now, again, I'm not saying anything about Hitler that's remotely good, But sometimes there's political uprisings that happen, and he could have just been capitalizing on that in some level. So those are the big reasons why the Jewish people of all people were being persecuted against. And we're going to go ahead and move on to slide 4. Ms. McClellan, this is your slide.
How come more Jews didn't hide out like Anne Frank's family during the Holocaust? That was Breezy's question, and I really like this question, Breezy, because it tells me 2 things. 1, you didn't finish Act 2 yet, so that's a hint. It was not as easy to hide out as you may think. First of all, you know the Jews had already started wearing the Star of David on their underclothing. They were targeted. The soldiers were out there letting me looking for Jewish people, so you weren't really legally allowed to leave. The Franks went to Denmark, but Germans were expanding everywhere. They were trying to take over the continent, so it wasn't easy. There wasn't a place where the Germans weren't going to find you. What else am I missing? Risky for the host family. It's very risky for the host family. So if you are taking in a Jewish family, then you are now part of the problem instead of part of the solution, and you will be targeted. And the Germans were everywhere.
Yeah, I moved back to the map, which you don't have, Miss McClellan, but there were concentration camps throughout Central Europe. I mean, all the way into France, up into Norway, and this is a terrible map. I should have picked a different map. But over here is France, and then all the way up into Norway, even into Germany, up in here. So, you do have the map. That's right. So, the question again, we're going to come back to that, was how come
more Jews didn't hide out like Anne Frank's family during the Holocaust?
The answer is they probably did. Anne Frank is just very famous too, so a lot of them that escaped probably got away with it, as we don't know how many people actually survived by hiding too, so they're just not as written down. There's also stories about the United States. They sent boats of German Jewish people back because they didn't want them, which is just insane. This isn't. It was very much during this time we got this question, but we didn't want to answer it because it's too complicated. So.
I would like to ask though, as we were reading through the questions, the United States sent back boats of Holocaust survivors, but I mean, escapees. Did they know what was going to happen on the other side?
There's conflicting reports. Honestly, I think that there were rumors, but rumors are hard to propagate. So there's a lot of, most normal people, most everyday Americans didn't have a clue what was going on. There's a really, 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 really good scene in the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers where they liberate one of the concentration camps, and they portray the German citizens who live a mile outside the concentration camps of having no idea about them happening. So you don't have Twitter, you don't have CNN, you don't have Fox News, you don't have news in general, and it's hard for us to wrap our head around the fact that we don't know, that people didn't know everything that wasn't going on outside of their small world. I don't think you have to look up, you can look at me.
I like looking at you up there because I know you're there.
Okay.
Anyhow.
All right.
That's true. There's a book called Night. It's by a guy named Eli Wiesel, and he is also a Jewish person who survived the Holocaust and internment with his family. But he talks about being in his small town and the sense of denial that this was going to happen. So that's part of it. You know, they didn't really believe it was something happening there near them. Continue. Sorry.
All right, we're on slide 5, Miss McClellan.
Right.
Yeah, I jump around.
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
Me too.
So this is from Tommy Howard. The Germans were not the only people to commit atrocities throughout history. Why don't we focus on the others? It's a really, really good question. The answer, and I put up a map here of all of the gulags that are in the Soviet Union. And what I learned from my last slideshow from last Wednesday was that the actual concentration camps started out very similar to the gulags. They were there as political prisoners, different types of political prisoners, and the Germans kind of evolved into the horrible gas chambers and all of that. Whereas the Soviet Union, at least there isn't as much documentation of how they.
I have a little insight into that.
Okay.
So my ex-mother-in-law, who's a delightful little tiny woman, her
who is Russian, correct?
Yeah, she's Russian.
Yeah.
And her dad actually ran a gulag towards Asia. They had to take the transcontinental train over, and she said he claimed to have no knowledge that that type of atrocities were going on. So they completely denied whether it was really happening or not. They stuck to denial. And she, as a little girl, didn't have insight, but she was there. So,
I mean,
personal story.
There were Japanese people that were placed in internment camps here in the United States as well. So,
right.
You hate to say it's a sign of the times, but it very much was. They rounded up Japanese people in America and put them in internment camps. I was in a museum in Washington, D.C.
You guys can't see this. Anyhow, I'm going to hold it up anyhow.
I should have had you scan it to me.
I will. What that was is a chart that shows kind of a peak of rates of deaths by genocides from 1900 to 2008. It shows this peak between 1940 and 1950 Nazi, Soviet, and Japanese genocide. So, sign of times.
All right, I think we're going to move on to slide 6. And this is yours. Why did Hitler have the Jewish people shave their heads?
That's by Emily Marshall. When I teach Anne Frank, I like to teach about dehumanization and there are steps of dehumanization and there are steps for genocides. They're studied. People know what they are. When Hitler was working towards his extermination policies, he had a plan. It wasn't haphazard. It didn't just occur. People didn't just start hating on the Jews. So there are 5 steps of dehumanization. Establishing a majority superiority. So this idea that the Aryan race is the best, the majority population is the best. The people in power are the smartest. They're the most insightful. The other people need them. They can't survive without them. Establishing analogies about infestation. So when we start to see humans, Jews being referred to as swarming in, infesting, rats, bugs that need to be stomped out, it's on purpose. It's a step towards helping the mass populace think of the folks who are being targeted as the enemy as other than. They don't deserve what we have. The third step is propaganda, and this is where they start to really push the idea of hate towards. So there's a passivity at step 2 where they start talking about infestation. The propaganda starts to push people towards the idea that it's okay to be part of. And when we hit the dehumanization and violence part, people have become, deadened, immune to that it would be incorrect. And we're not talking about everybody, but you're talking about, that was Jace, you're talking about the masses. The majority of the people are now in agreement. And when they see violence against Jewish people, they no longer feel that they need to interfere. They don't see the Jews as being like them. They're other than. And it wasn't just Jewish people. It was homosexuals. It was people with mental illness. Other populations, Mr. Turner, that you
the gypsies.
The The gypsies, the Roma. Yeah.
It started out with communists and socialists too. Those were the first people that were actually put in the concentration camps, which is ironic because Nazi stands for National Socialist, but I digress.
So dehumanization at that point, if prompted to do something harmful to another, the majority of the population is now on board. The steps have worked, and they are ready to actively be violent towards other. And the last step is extermination and removal of the pests, the rats, to get rid of the problem. And when you think about that, in real terms, it's devastating. Getting rid of the problem.
It's
not so bad.
We're gonna talk about how
not so bad.
we're gonna talk about how quick it goes from step 1 to step 5. I mean, we're talking a matter of days for people to get used to that. We're gonna double back to that here in a second, because you guys actually just experienced it. But we're gonna go ahead and move on, and we're gonna double back to this here in a minute. All right. The next question, and I forgot to write down who it was from, was: did all Germans support Hitler's plan for the Jewish people? The answer is unequivocally no. We had a student, Hannah DeGraal's grandmother, a couple years ago. Her grandmother left Nazi Germany in the middle of the night because she saw what was going on and didn't like it. This right here, I meant to put her name down, I think her name is Sophia. She was the number one person who was against Hitler and an anti-Nazi during this era. So, once again, the easy answer is no. Not everybody was pro-Hitler during the time. All right. We are on slide 8. Did anyone successfully...
fall back on what we were just discussing.
Yeah, I should have done better on that one. All right.
That's good.
So Miss McClellan was talking about going from step 1 to step 5 and how quickly it happened. And you guys actually just lived Overton's window. We talked about Overton's window when we talked about freeing the slaves and how they couldn't really just free the slaves. They had to kind of change over time. And freeing the slaves, I feel like it took about 100 years. It took from 1864, at the end of the Civil War, to 1964 with the final real piece of civil rights legislation. Overton's window is this idea that you can take something from public policy to unthinkable, and you have to kind of do it slowly over time. And when we talk about...
unthinkable to public policy?
Well, I'm sorry, you're right. Policy to unthinkable. The best example of this, hold on, I'll get there, I promise, or I hope to get there, that's my goal, is the quarantine. On March 1st, if you would have said by March 20th, you guys are going to be locked in your houses and you're not going to be able to go anywhere, you would have said you were insane. That absolutely wasn't going to happen. Miss McClellan, you have a story you want to share or not really?
Do I? Oh, Story Night by Eli.
No.
Another story?
About how you told the boss if you should. Do you think...
I'll tell that story, sure. It was February, and I'd been reading a lot about the coronavirus in other places in the world, and I saw Mrs. Trine, so I said to Mrs. Trine, should I become Florida virtual school certified? Should I get ready to slide over there? And she looked at me like I was crazy. And I thought, oh, I blundered. I'm crazy. I should not have said that to my boss. And, 3 weeks later, when we were told we weren't coming back, she sent me a text saying, well, I thought you were crazy, but you showed me. So I feel a little...
They didn't just lock us in our houses. They took away one thing slowly at a time. At first, it was like, okay, we're going to shut the schools down for an extra week. And then they were like, oh, we're going to shut the schools down till April 15th, and we're going to close the stores. And we're going to close the beaches. And they did a little bit every day. And as they were going...
Now we're closing the restaurants.
And now we're closing the restaurants and bars, and they're kind of opening things up in the same sort of manner. Oh yeah, by the way, they canceled all sports. That was horrible for me. Sorry, bad joke.
Don't miss it.
And they did it so slowly that you just kind of got used to it. And I had a lot of trouble with it personally, being in quarantine. And we're not trying to compare quarantine and the Holocaust, but back on track here. They did things so slowly to the Jewish people that people just got used to it. Like, you got used to being quarantined. Like, you got used to being in your house and staring at your computer and learning online and not going to the beach and not doing those things. The same thing happened with the Jewish people, and it's really important that you see both the Overton's window system and the way Miss McClellan explained it, because you need to know when people are doing this to you. You need to know when governments are slowly sliding you from something that is policy to unthinkable. Because again, on March 1st, you would have thought it was unthinkable. You would have thought it was insane to say that on May 1st, you're going to be locked in your house and you haven't gone anywhere for 6 weeks. You would have said, that's crazy, that's never going to happen. But here you are, and you totally accepted it. So, anything?
Which you had to do. It was a good choice. You need to take care of yourself.
It was a good choice, but when it was happening, I'm like, you're being Overton windowed. You're being Overton windowed. And it was probably the first time I've ever been Overton windowed. Our last question here came from Zeb. Ms. McClellan, we're on the last slide. Whenever there are mass death events in a certain population, are there ripples of that event for years to come? He specifically asked about birth rates. We don't necessarily know about birth rates. We talked a little bit about this. The Jewish religion is incredibly social. You guys grew up and lived in a Christian household, most of you, some form of Christianity, and the Jewish people hang on to their traditions because they know that if they don't hang on to their traditions, they'll lose them. Now, there are a lot of Jewish people, and there are a lot of Jewish people who are very spiritual, but the Jewish religion in general is much more traditional than the Christian religion. The Christian religion is much more spiritual, whereas the Jewish religion, it's just tradition after tradition after tradition, and they hang on to those traditions because if they don't, the next generation will lose them. And that, to me, is the trickle-down effect that Zeb was asking.
I think that's kind of interesting. I'm going to say some of those traditions are spiritual by nature.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And so as they recognize their religious belief system, they do it through these tight communities that help keep them strong as a people. You know, I think sometimes they refer to themselves as a people without a nation, without a country, right? So it's important that they maintain that. They were getting eliminated in Germany, but they held on in Anne Frank. They have their Yom Kippur.
That's a holiday, yeah.
I think it's the Yom Kippur, Hanukkah that they celebrated in Anne Frank. Sorry, but they did it in hiding, in secret, because it was important. Peter wanted to take his star off because he hated being marked by the Nazis as Jewish, and Anne said, "But it's who you are. It should be a representation. You should be proud to wear that star." The ripple effect, as I see it, Mr. Turner, I think the ripple effect is more in our societal consciousness of genocide and the levels of dehumanization and the steps to complete genocide. I think by being aware of history, we have made substantial inroads into trying to not let it happen, although it continues to happen.
I mean, it happens all over the world, and, you know, slowing it down is important as well, which making people aware of it, and why we as teachers talk about it is to make you aware that it's happened and show you how it happened to the best of our ability and why it happened. And you being able to see that in the future helps slow down the process. Even if we can't stop it, we can slow it down, and that is incredibly important too.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. It was nice working with you today.
It's nice working with you too. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us on our podcast. Hopefully you guys will come and see us someday.
Okay.
Bring your textbooks back.